Welcome everyone to Coffee Time, our latest episode. The lockdown is easing up now, but we're still carrying on having some discussions with some of our friends, and I'm really excited to be joined today by my friend Shari, who most of you won't know because she's not actually from the Isle of Wight. Dun, dun, dun. But I know Shari through church. She's connected through one of the sites of the church that I go to on the island on the mainland. So she's from across the water. How exciting. And she's come to chat to us about the important issue of racism today. So Shari, thank you so much for being willing to join us. Do you want to just introduce yourself, say a little about yourself, about your family, your job, like who you are?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's such a pleasure to be invited to speak today. So I'm Shari, I am married to Andy, and we have two daughters, Kyra and Hope, who are 9 and 6. I work for Kerith Community Church, which is how I know Chris, and I am the worship pastor, so I oversee all the events, the singing on a Sunday, all the musical aspects of our Sunday meetings. I was born and raised in Reading, a little town in Berkshire, which was a multicultural town, and at the age of 8 we moved to Farnborough in Hampshire, which was a predominantly white area. So on our street we were the only black family. My heritage is Caribbean. My mum is from Barbados and my dad is from Jamaica. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow, amazing, fantastic. And Andy that you're married to, I've met Andy as well, and he's white as well, isn't he?
He is white.
So
yeah.
Do you want to tell us, like, what have there been any challenges around that for you as a couple and for your children?
So interestingly, I was probably one of the first black people that Andy interacted with. So we met at work. So he really didn't have any interactions with black families, black people. So it was me and another guy that we worked with, and so we kind of met. Challenge-wise, I think from my parents' side, they were a little bit nervous about, or just anxious about, the culture differences and the impacts that any children we might have on their identity. And this was based on their sort of previous experiences. In terms of on his parents' side, there wasn't really any challenges apart from there'd be things like Andy's mum would say, "Am I allowed to call you black?" And I think that's come from a lot of people taking offence with terms like black or coloured. There's those sorts of things. But generally, as a married couple, we've not really had any issues in England. We have when we've been over abroad. In the Caribbean, that was unfortunately, Andy was in the minority, and he was challenged for being with me. So we've experienced it outside of the UK. Sure.
Yeah, so good to hear that you haven't experienced too much negative stuff as a couple in the UK. Yeah. So I've heard some people say that racism isn't, particularly an issue in the UK, and that it's mainly an American thing or an overseas thing. What would you say about that? Because maybe you haven't as a couple, but do you want to tell us about any experiences you've had individually of? Yeah,
it's interesting you say that. So I think racism does exist in the UK. It may not be as overt as what we see in the States, so you may not see the likes of the George Floyd stuff here, but you do definitely experience stuff. I've experienced stuff when I was a kid. So like I mentioned before, we moved to Farnborough when I was 8, so we were the only black family on our street. I was the only black girl at school at the time, and one of the instances I remember was a dinner lady. I was in the school playground, one of my plaits came undone, and I just asked the dinner lady, "Would you be able to just replat my hair for me?" And her response was, "I'm really sorry, Shari, I can't do that because my hands might get messy." So that was quite startling for me, and I guess even as an 8-year-old, I thought that was wrong. And as I've kind of gone through my years, I've thought, why did she say that? Was she implying that my hair was dirty because of my colour? So that was my first sort of real knowledge of being treated differently because of the colour of my skin.
Yeah, sure.
And other things, as a family, we were called the N-word. I remember walking down the road and just a group of boys walked past us, held their noses and shouted poo at us. We've had like a neighbour, when we moved to Farnborough, our neighbours wouldn't talk to us initially. And then my little sister and the little boy were playing together one time, and the following day, his dad must have said to him that he couldn't play with my sister because we don't play with girls like you. And not long after that, they moved away. So, all sorts of stuff.
Oh, it's hard. It's heartbreaking to hear stories like that.
Yeah.
What would you say, like, people can do to help with the issue? Like some people have said, it's not enough to just be quiet and just to say, well, I'm not racist, so it's not an issue that affects me, I'm just going to ignore it.
Yeah.
Like on the Isle of Wight, it's not very diverse. Like lots of people
Yeah.
watching and listening to this might not know any black people, might have never even spoken to a black person before. What would you think they could do to kind of help engage with this issue and make it better in the future?
I think, like for all of us, so for myself, I was silent as a black person, and there were reasons for that, because black people sadly get targeted with different stereotypes, like you're angry, you cause too much trouble, and that sort of thing. But I was silent out of fear because of those labels. But I think if all of us are willing to sort of find out a little bit more information, find out what's going on and why, look at the reasons why all this racial tension and why people are sort of rioting and marching for the Black Lives Matter movement, just find out a little bit about what happens. I think try and think of how other people might think. Put yourself in another person's shoes. So I'm speaking to you guys on the island. Your viewpoint of the world will be very different because of where you live and the part that you have compared to mine. The white experience is very different to the black experience. And also think about challenging anything that you might hear or see, if it's safe to do so. I guess a lot of you guys, young people, will have access to social media and smartphones, so you'll be seeing what's going on. So if you see anything or hear anything that's not right, perhaps just challenge it. Perhaps if in your group of friends you're making jokes that aren't appropriate to people of a different race, and just challenge it, speak up about it, be a part of making the change that needs to happen really in this time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, what are your thoughts in terms of, like, obviously you've got kids, about the future and what you'd like to see change over the next, for the next generation, like how you'd like to see things change, and what are some of the roots and causes behind racism that you think need to be kind of addressed and come to light?
I think the big thing is not being afraid to speak out. This whole thing has raised a lot of stuff up in me. I think I'd suppressed a lot of stuff out of fear and not wanting to cause trouble. And I think in terms of my kids, I'd like for them not to be afraid to challenge stuff that they have seen or are seeing happening. I'd like 20 years from now, that they can look back on what's going on and see that change has been made for the good, that they that change has been made and their lives are safe, because I'm worried that because of the colour of their skin that racism might have an impact on them. They might be discriminated against. But I think things like, like I said, I don't think racism here is as overt as it is in the States, but things like school exclusions, things like disproportionate stop and searching of young black men compared to white young men. Those sorts of things need to be, they're some of the root things that are happening, as opposed to name calling, jokes and things like that. So there's a lot of deep-seated stuff in that needs to be removed in order for change to happen and addressed.
Yeah, I've been reading up and talking to quite a few people about, some of the more underground covert issues and some of the systemic racism, and you touched on, some of the things there. And I heard somebody chatting about, a guy that we know, Palumi, talking about not using his name on his first name on job application because he knew that would make him more likely to be passed over for a role. What do you think white people like myself and other people watching this can do to address some of those more underlying causes? Is there anything that you think we can do?
I think the biggest thing is challenging these things. I think it's so easy to think this stuff doesn't affect me, and I think, so for me, growing up in a predominantly white area, I experienced racism when I was little, not so much as an adult. And I think because it wasn't affecting me, I didn't do much. But the reality is it could, with this thing blowing up, it could affect my children. So I think black, white, whatever race we are, we all have a part to play in challenging it. And in whatever level, the thing is raising awareness, speaking about it, educating ourselves. In whatever place you are. I remember I was reading about the mayor of Bristol, I think his name's Marvin Rees, and you know, he's able to have a voice. If we can find like black people, mixed race people having places or opportunities in some of the higher areas of life that can make a difference, that will help. But that will only help if we all pull together, if we all kind of speak up and not be silent. I think that's the main thing. Don't be quiet about it.
Yeah, I've certainly, I mean, it's challenging and sometimes awkward and difficult to address these issues, but really important and valuable and helpful, and definitely, you know, we're definitely it seems like we're at a time in history where a lot of this stuff is kind of coming to the forefront and being tackled a bit more head on. Do you feel like, from your perspective, is there a change happening? Is it significant, or do you think this is going to blow over and it's just going to go back to the way things were?
I don't think this time it's going to blow over. I think it's gone a little bit quieter than 4 weeks ago or however long ago it was. But I think we're slowly chipping away at what's happening. The conversations that I'm having, you know, I mean, like even this conversation today, I never would have thought that I'd be having this kind of conversation. I've been on a panel for like parenting mixed race children. There's lots of opportunities for all of us, and it's just for us to grab those. So it's like just a gentle chiseling away at this block of racism until it eventually goes. So I don't think it's going to change overnight.
Sure.
At all, but I do think, I'm praying that in the next 20 years that this thing has changed, because when I listen to the stories of my mum and dad, what they encountered, they're in their 60s and 70s now, and I'm listening to stories, you know, on social media and interviews that I've seen. Nothing's changed. You know, why not? This can't carry on for another 30, 40 years. Something has got to change. And I think everyone's eyes have been opened really to the reality of racism. I don't think it's something that we can push under a stone anymore. It's out there. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, and I mean, I've even been struck by, you know, the footballers taking a knee at the start of the games, and lots of people kind of, you know, wondering what that's all about, and it's kind of spreading into different sports and different arenas as well. What do you think about like the protests, and like there was some statues pulled down, and obviously there's been lots of different things going on over the last few weeks that were sparked off by the murder of George Floyd. What do you think about kind of how people can express themselves, how people can support the cause, but in kind of a responsible way? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I mean, first of all, I don't condone any criminal damage or anything like that. In a way I can understand, you know, when you're angry, you respond, don't you, sometimes without thinking.
Yeah.
So there's that deep-seated anger that's kind of just like a volcano erupted. However, I think there's a right way to kind of express your feelings and your concerns. And there'll be some of us who are real activists and want to go out on marches, peaceful marches, just kind of highlighting awareness. I mean, pulling down that statue, again, I understand why, because of what it represented. But for me, I think, you know, the statue was pulled down and it's now, I don't know where it is, but perhaps that could have been placed in a museum that kind of highlights kind of what went on, used for educational purposes, maybe.
I think that's what they're planning to do with it, isn't it? But I mean, lots of people have different views about, but I just want to go back to what you said about the anger. Lots of people can't understand or don't understand what all the fuss is about. Like, I've heard people say to me, like, why is it such a big deal? You know? What would you say to that?
I guess if you think about it, if you've been downtrodden, stepped on, held down for years, like it is like the analogy of a volcano. It's stuff burns up and builds up within. You've had so much injustice, so much discrimination, and I guess at some point there's only so much that you can take.
Sure.
And you blow. And it's really difficult for me because I'm generally a very gentle person. And when I read and hear about the injustices, when I hear about how my mum was treated, like my mum came over from Barbados in the 60s. She was 14. She was doing really well at school. She wasn't tested or anything to see what level she was at. She was just automatically put down a year. And that impacted her school life. She just couldn't be bothered after that, you know. And that hurts me and that makes me angry, but then it's how do we redirect that anger to a positive, to achieve something positive. So people say, what's the fuss? Until you've experienced it, you won't understand.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important. Just have a conversation, as awkward and as uncomfortable as it might feel. Find out, do your research, like, you know, use this as a starting point to find out why people are responding the way that they are.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there are some that play the race card. I know people like that for any reason, but I would say the majority are genuinely just feeling really upset about being discriminated for and suppressed for so long. And so, yeah, it's just bubbled over.
Yeah, sure. Is there anything that you'd like to say to teenagers watching this, like advice that you'd like to give them? You know, the vast majority of them will be white kids living on the Isle of Wight that probably don't know that many black people.
Sure.
What would you say to them about your experience and what they can do to engage with this issue?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what we try and teach our girls, just respect people, value people for who they are, regardless of what they look like. You know, this is whether it's a race thing, whether it's about a disability. Just respect people for who they are and treat others how you would like to be treated. And that's what I was saying about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Think about how they're treated. Make yourself aware that racism does exist. Don't be ignorant. It does exist. Look at what happens and why it happens. Like I said, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Check out all the various interviews that are out there, young and old. Just be careful about what you look at, because I found that different people that I follow, a lot of the stuff that they're posting is kind of inciting hatred towards white people or other races, rather than promoting unity and promoting change. So just be careful.
Yeah, it's a very divisive issue, isn't it? And people it quickly takes sides, and then it can become a bit aggressive or a bit.
And that's not what, for me, that's not what it's about. And, you know, I'm just speaking for me. You know, there are different other black people with different experiences, but for me, it's not about being divisive or this side against that side. It's about just being together and living together as we should. And like I said, just challenging anything that doesn't sit quite right, if it's safe to do so. If not, you know, just highlight it to someone that you've seen, just highlight it to someone that you trust and respect, you know, whether it's in school, college. We inherit so much stuff, you know, attitudes, values, behaviors, like from our families and those around us, and that sometimes creates the views that we might have about people. So sometimes a bit of self-reflection is important as well. Like, what do you think about race and racism? So, yeah.
Well, I mean, Shari, that's been so helpful and just brilliant to hear your viewpoint and your perspective, and thank you for being honest and open with us. I'm sure you will have given the people watching this lots to think about and reflect on. Just before you go, just a couple of quick fire questions. Normally we sort of finish up with a few random questions on these interviews. So the first one is, what is your favorite sound?
Oh, I love the sound of running water.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just relaxes me.
And when, I mean, lockdown is easing up, but when it's kind of finally kind of done, this whole thing is over, what are you most looking forward to getting back to doing again?
Going out somewhere to eat and not having to cook every single day.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Well, Shari, thank you so much for joining us. It's been brilliant.
My pleasure.
And we really appreciate it. And I'll let you go and get on with whatever you're up to. And everybody that's tuned in, thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, drop us a comment. If you've got any questions for us, let us know. And we'll be in touch with you all very soon. Goodbye. God bless. Bye. Thanks very much for watching, guys.